In my studies this week, sometimes I just end up following a wild hair, and I got to thinking about when Jesus went on the road, which was a lot. You know, who went with him? How many people are we talking about? Are there men and women? Is it the 12 plus other people? And if there are women, how many women are they and who are they? And my plan was to work on that tonight, but it's turned into two studies. Tonight, we're going to look at the guys. Next week, we'll look at the gals. I think the women who went with him are actually more interesting, but there are things that you don't know about the 12 that probably you'll learn tonight with a new PowerPoint that I put together. And if you're ready to go, we're going to hit it.
All right.
All right. I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to open it up right now. My curiosity, and by the way, these are the actors from The Chosen, which is not a bad series. Not perfect, but helpful, and at least making an attempt to be honest, and not afraid to try to be faithful to the scriptures themselves, which so many movies aren't. Directors sometimes don't even bother to check with historians or with scholars, or they just make stuff up. So it's good to see someone trying to do otherwise. So what's wrong with this picture? So Thaddeus and little James may be the same person, and one of the 12 disciples named Judas, son of James, is missing. So our list of the disciples differ slightly.
I don't see Bartholomew.
So Bartholomew
Became Matthew.
No, that Matthew is Levi, but
That's
we'll
right.
get there.
Okay.
We'll get there.
Use your
All
preacher
right.
voice.
Yeah, so let's look at the hometowns of his key followers. Where'd they come from? Do we know? And who are these men and women who traveled with Jesus every day when he was out on the road, which was frequently over the course of his ministry, which was primarily in Galilee? So all of the ones on the left that you see, all of the 12 were apparently from Galilee, with one exception. Judas might not have been. Judas was dead by the time this verse in Acts happens that Luke is describing. It says in Acts 1 that when Jesus had said this, as they were watching, he was lifted up and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while he was going and they were gazing up toward heaven, suddenly two men in white robes stood by them and said, "Men of Galilee." Hint, hint.
Mm-hmm.
Men of Galilee. It sounds like everybody there is from Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
And there's at least 11 guys there.
Mm-hmm.
So because Judas is dead. So Judas aside, I think that we can safely say they're all Galileans. Why do you stand looking upward toward heaven? This Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come the same way you saw him going to heaven. So by this point in the story, Judas Iscariot's dead. He may have been the only one not from Galilee, but we'll get to that shortly. But because the remaining apostles are referred to as men of Galilee, we can presume, yep, they're probably all Galileans. But where in Galilee? You know, Galilee is a pretty big region. You can see on the map there, lots of places are in Galilee: Megiddo, Nazareth, Cana, Sepphoris, Tiberias, Magadan, Capernaum, Chorazin, you name it. There are quite a number of towns there named. They're all in Galilee, and Jesus visited a lot of them. He spent most of his time visiting these places in Galilee. So what were the hometowns of these men? And where were they living when they met Jesus? P.S. Although Jesus was a Judean by birth, Jerusalem's where Judea is, he was raised in Nazareth, which, as you can see on the map here, is in Galilee. And from about the age of 4 until about the age of 30, Jesus was a Galilean, but not born a Galilean. All right, so let's see if we can narrow it down. The scriptures are very clear. John 1:44, okay? 3 of the 12 are from Bethsaida. It's the northernmost fishing village on the Sea of Galilee. It is situated adjacent to the Jordan River, where the river empties into the sea. And they are listed as Philip, Andrew, and Simon. Andrew and Simon are brothers. So it says in John 1:44, now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And although on the Sea of Galilee, it was on the east side of the Jordan River, meaning it was over the border, not under the rule of Herod Antipas, but the brother of Herod Philip, who ruled Canaaneos. So the question for many years has been, if you'll look at Bethsaida up there with the question mark, where is it? So we've got Et Tel, which Rami Arav, one of our partners and one of the archaeologists over there, has been digging now there for, I think, 20 years, or at least 15. Bargil Pixner, who found it, helped in that place, and I met him there. I met Rami, Bargil, and several other archaeologists there that slip my mind right now. But they're digging at Et Tel. There's another place that's down closer to the sea. But the thing is, that's weird to me, is that if Et Tel is Bethsaida, it's actually in Herod Philip's territory, which means that they weren't Galileans. They were from Canaaneos. So that's kind of confusing. Or maybe technically they were concluded as Galileans, depending on where the Romans decided to arbitrarily put the border. But it was a fishing village at the time, even though now it's about a mile from the water. Over 2,000 years, the silt and the earthquakes from the Jordan River have filled in an alluvial, what they call an alluvial plain. It's very fertile. And it has isolated a place that used to be right on the water. It could be the place, but it's like Bethsaida is the border, you know, it's somewhere up there in the very north. I don't know where I am with that right now. I'm not sure that we necessarily found it. What Rami's finding there is incredible. It was a first century village, and beneath the first century village is an Iron Age city with the most massive gate in all of Israel, bigger than Megiddo, bigger than Hatzor. It's a big gate. So they're finding good stuff, but I'm not sure we've actually found. I'm still fuzzy about Bethsaida just a little bit. My heart's with Rami, but there's reasons to think this through, and I'm still thinking it through. But this is the city that 3 of the disciples were from, at least 3. Now, what did Andrew and Peter do? We don't know what Philip did. We knew Andrew and Peter were fishermen, right? They work together as fishermen, and they are from Bethsaida. Interesting part that we're going to find out in a minute is they also have a house in Capernaum. Do you know that? Yeah. Okay. So although on the Sea of Galilee, it's on the border. Yeah, I mean, it's right on the border between Herod Antipas's territory, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, and then to the right on the map, Canaaneos is Herod Philip's territory. That side of the lake today is where the Golan Heights are. And by the way, where it says Magdala, that's a problem. Of course, the tourist industry has jumped on that being Magdala. The problem is that all the ancient copies of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when they talk about it, say Magadan. And translators from the 5th, 6th century decided that they were mispronouncing Magdala because they needed a place to visit where Mary Magdala was from. But Mary Magdala is actually Miriam Magdalene. It's Mary the Magdalene, which means Mary the Tower. So it may have been a nickname like he gave to the sons of thunder. You know, James and John are the sons of thunder. Mary is the tower. Peter is the rock. You follow? Mm-hmm. So we're not sure. So when we call that Magdala, we've not really identified Magdala. We may have identified Migdal. May have identified Magadan, the ruins of Magadan. Doesn't mean Jesus didn't go there. He almost certainly did. It was a Hebrew fishing village, and it is mentioned in the scriptures, but there's not really a story from there except that he got out of the boat there, I think. So all these ancient fishing harbors are put together. These little drawings were put together by Mendel Noon, who died some time back, but was sort of the grandfather around the lake for identifying all these harbors. Gergesso on the right is where they traditionally have the story of the demoniac and the pigs running into the sea. Yeah. Gadara is misplaced at the very bottom. It's actually inland. All right, so we got three of the disciples from Bethsaida. That's the very north end of the Sea of Galilee at where the Jordan River empties into it, at that alluvial plain. And that's Philip, Andrew, and Peter. We don't know what Philip did for a living. We know Andrew and Peter were fishermen. Well, let's see what happens next. It's like it's frozen. Here we go. All right. So this is Et Tel on the left. And you can see that Rami's done a good job excavating the first century, some of the first century houses, especially over there on the left, or what is the east side of the Tel, because this is looking south. You can see the Sea of Galilee in the distance. These are the three fellows who play these characters, you know, and on The Chosen. That's Simon, Peter, Andrew, and Philip. All right. Now, so here's a photo of some of the ruins of Capernaum. So interestingly, Simon Peter and his brother Andrew also had a house at Capernaum where Simon's mother-in-law lived. I just want to point this out to you. Jesus taught and healed in the Capernaum synagogue, and then look what happens. And these are three different versions, I think, of the same story. Mark says the centurion, he's talking to the centurion on the way home from the synagogue, and the servant is healed. Okay, so when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her. She got up and began to serve. Mark says they went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. And then as soon as they left the synagogue, I can hear somebody talking. They entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Okay, they entered the house. Listen to me, everybody. They entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now, what do we know about Simon, Andrew, James, John, and their father Zebedee? They're partners in fishing, which I'll show you in a minute. So it looks like that these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys, plus the mother-in-law, plus the wife, live in this house, is what appears is going on, which is why we think that Jesus made this his home too. It is a rather largish house for its day. It would have accommodated a number of people. And this particular house in Capernaum was venerated by the earliest Christians by tearing out the roof, creating an arch, doubling the size of the room, plastering it, and then putting Jesus graffiti all over it. Okay, so one of these houses from the late first and early second century was already being venerated as a special room. And this may have been where Jesus slept, or where he taught, or where they did something together. It was the place where he taught and they gathered together. We're not sure. But we know it's a special room in a special house. Well, we think it's this house. Can't prove it. But as soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Now, why do Simon and Andrew own a house in Capernaum if they're from Bethsaida? Well, does that mean they moved? It could be. It could be they're maintaining dual residence. Or it could be that Simon's wife was the oldest daughter of a woman who lost her husband. She was a widow and had no sons. So the oldest daughter marries Simon, and now Simon becomes, by law, the head of the household. So he and Andrew come over there to help her run the house. So now living in the house is Andrew and Peter, and Peter's wife, and Peter's mother-in-law, and James and John are partners with them, and here they come into the house too. It just looks like people are living there. And
what would be the other option if that's not the way it
well,
was?
James and John could have lived anywhere, because it doesn't tell us where they lived or where they're from. We'll find that out in a minute. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in the bed with a fever. They told him about it at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Fever left, and she began to serve them. Okay, down at the bottom, this is Luke's quick version. After leaving the synagogue, he entered Simon's house. Notice it's Peter's house in Matthew. It's the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John in Mark, and it's Simon's house in Luke. They're putting it differently, but we're talking about the same house and the same people.
What if they were just visiting, like they were friends? James and John didn't live
So
there.
they could, they are friends and they're fellow disciples partnering with Jesus on the road. And Jesus is living somewhere nearby. It keeps talking about the house, as you'll see in a minute. I think it's this house. And if they're not on the road, this seems to be the place where they stay. Now, James and John may be from Bethsaida. They may have a house in Bethsaida. But if Jesus is staying in Capernaum, and it says he is, they probably would have stayed there too, permanently or not. So James and John could have been from Capernaum as well. We don't know. Could have had their own house. Maybe they're just visiting, like you said. So here's that special house in that special room. They built a church over the top of it. Looks a bit like a flying saucer. But underneath it, in these octagon shapes, that's a church that was built in like the 4th century to commemorate the little house church. Was it 5th century? It was 4th or 5th century. Underneath it is a house church that was plastered. And before the house church, it was just a regular house. And we think that this house could be, they call it St. Peter's house, okay? It could be the one being referred to where they all hang out. It refers to the scriptures a lot of the house that he's living in. When he was at home, they're staying somewhere. Evidence points in that direction. It's a little too strong to presume, but I think that we can assume with some confidence that maybe with a better than 50-50 chance, this is clearly a place that was important to early Christians. It's the place that they selected. It could very well be Peter's house.
And what's on the top here?
A church.
And how old is that?
The church is modern.
That's what I was just about to say. That looks very modern.
But you see the walls underneath?
Yeah.
Okay, that's these octagonally shaped walls in blue. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's just sort of like a floor plan. And then the gray lines are the actual 1st century house beneath it. And in the middle of the octagon is where they knocked out a wall and created a place to worship. And there's Christian graffiti on the plaster inside. That's very, very old. Older than the church, which is 4th or 5th century.
So those are different rooms, the little squares. Those are
those are
rooms
little different little rooms in the house. It's a pretty big house. By 1st century standards, yeah, this is palatial. They have multiple rooms for people to stay in, and you would have, people sleeping everywhere. It looks like it could have held all 12 disciples to me without any problem. It was, roomy little, it was sort of like a blockhouse, Yeah,
that reminds me of our house in the Bahamas. The pastor's house. Well, in our culture, everybody comes to the pastor's house to hang out. And then with my parents having so many kids, all ages, like, right behind one another, all the neighbors and friends, everybody had a friend in the house. And so everybody hung out in our yard and played ball and whatnot. They came down every Sunday.
Everybody crammed in.
Yeah, we have, people coming from, and you don't ask any question. You just show up and my mom feeds everybody.
That's a really good metaphor for what's going on, because when Jesus is at home, it says when he's at home, so many people come, they can't get out the door. Yeah. Everybody's in the yard. People are climbing up on the roof and tearing holes to let sick people down. They can't sleep, they can't eat. And at one point in Mark 1, Jesus just disappears and goes away, and they're like, Jesus is missing. Where'd he go? And he needed a break. Yeah. Read Mark 1. It's there. I'm not lying.
No, look at the picture I put behind me now.
Behind you? Yes, yeah. That's a close-up of the central octagon of that sacred room where they turned it into that's the earliest house church on earth. Okay. I don't think there's an earlier one than that one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's a very important spot when you go to visit the lake, right there on the Sea of Galilee, and which is really a lake.
Cool.
It's called the Canaaneos. It's fair to presume that this house is Jesus's home while he lived in Capernaum. I think that's fair to consider. It's the house of Andrew and Simon Peter and Simon's wife and Simon's mother-in-law. We don't know the names of either one of those women, We do know that Simon's wife traveled with him later on after Jesus's resurrection. When he left on his missionary journeys at the same time as Paul, his wife traveled with him, but we don't know much about her or her name. And we also, it could be that James and John are staying there because they're partners with Simon and Andrew in fishing. But their father Zebedee, you know, they got to think about him too. But consider this, if we go back a couple of slides, look how close together Bethsaida and Capernaum are on the map. I mean, you could walk there in 15 minutes. I mean, they're next to one another. Look at the map at the top. These are partner villages, so it makes sense for fishermen to partner with one another. You could live in one and have a house in the other, or you could live in one and stay with friends in the other. They're very close. And these guys were very close, both geographically and emotionally. These were friends and trusted business partners. For Simon and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of the fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. There's your partnership. And then in Matthew 4:13, it says, Jesus left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea. So now he's living there. So what house is he living in? Well, where does Peter and Andrew live? They own a house, and his wife lives there, and his mother-in-law lives there. Andrew lives there, and maybe James and John are hanging out there. Where's he going to go? Well, they're going to be staying together probably, or they'll find a place for Jesus to stay if he doesn't buy a house. We don't know, but they venerated that room in that house. Okay, so let's look at a couple of good drawings here. On the left, you can see Lean Rittenmeyer's drawing. He's not only an archaeologist, he is a architect and a draftsman, and so he looked at the entire layout of Capernaum, and on the left there, he drew a pretty good picture of the different harbors. The dock is 500 feet long. You can see the dock. You can see the house right in the middle is the one is the special one. I can't reach it from here. The special house is right in the middle of that picture on the left, and the synagogue is the big building in the upper left-hand corner. See the big one? So this is Capernaum. Now the special house that now has that spaceship on top of it, you're looking at it on the right picture. Okay, has an open courtyard. It has steps going up to the roof. They've made some concessions because they don't know exactly what the first, what the first century roof might have looked like. But they tend to be multi-story, and people sleep on the roof and work on the roof at night because it's cooler. That's why you see fish lying out to dry. They'll be sleeping up there later if it's summertime because it's cooler. And as you can see, it's right on the Sea of Galilee. When Jesus got off the boats and came home, he didn't have to walk 100 yards. It was more like 100 feet. He didn't have to go far at all. So it says in Mark 2:1-4, when he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. That's pretty strong language. People knew where he lived. He lived in a house somewhere here. And his number one disciple is Peter. And the top three are Peter, James, John. And the top four are Peter, James, John, and Andrew. So where are they living? He's probably living with them. And they were gathered around, so many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even at the front door, as he was speaking to the word to them. And then some people came and brought to him a paralyzed man carried by four of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and after having dug through it, they laid him down on a mat on which the paralytic lay. So you can imagine them trying to figure out a way to get on the roof. Last night I was imagining that the houses were close enough that maybe they threw a ladder over and carried him from one roof to the other, because the crowd was probably so big, they probably had to kind of roof skip and hop, to get the guy over to the roof to the house where Jesus was. Whatever they did, maybe they figured out a way to get up those steps. I don't know, but it's easier to imagine this story looking at these pictures, isn't it?
That's interesting, because I've always read that scripture and thought that they were letting the man down in the synagogue. I never thought about the house. For some reason, I thought he was in the temple.
Yeah, no, he was in a house, and
Yeah.
not only that, but what we're missing here is that around that courtyard right there on the lower, see where those men are standing? And see where the donkey is? That area, that courtyard area would have been more like a living space with a thatched roof all around it where people could sit in the shade and talk. So it may be that they tore through the thatch of that to get him down, to get the man down into the courtyard, as opposed to tearing a hole in the actual mud roof to get him down into a central room of the house. Okay, so we don't know for sure, but whatever they did, they were able to quickly tear open a space to lower him down safely. Imagine Jesus watching that. It must have been, I don't know. I mean, stuff's flying everywhere and landing in everybody's beards. Okay, so here is the next slide. So there's a pattern, and this just establishes that Jesus is living in a house in Capernaum. The disciples wait until they get home to ask him what he meant when he was teaching out by the sea. Matthew says, well, they didn't want to embarrass themselves probably or interrupt. Out of respect, they didn't say anything, and they didn't want to embarrass themselves because, you know, they're the disciples. They're supposed to get it. But if they had a question, they would wait till they got home and ask him in private, so they didn't make fools of themselves and didn't interrupt his teaching.
Well, see, so that hits home. I used to do that because I thought, well, I'm supposed to know this. You know, I'm not going to ask this question because people are going to look at me like, you know, I'm not smart or whatever have you. Bump that. It's time out. It's like, if you don't know, you don't know.
You're not afraid to do that anymore.
Oh, no, please. Life's too short.
Yeah.
But to pretend and all that. But I hear that. I see how they might have done that.
But it says in Matthew 13, the same day that Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea, such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood at the beach. And he told them many things in parables. Then he left the crowds and went back to the house. His disciples approached him saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. In Mark 7, it happens again. They entered the house. His disciples asked him about the parable. He was talking about all things being clean, that foods were clean. And it's not what you put into you that defiles you. It's what comes out of you that defiles. Yeah. Then Mark 9, they came to Capernaum, and when Jesus was in the house, again, he's living somewhere. This is his home, and he's got a place to live. He was in the house, and they asked him, what were you arguing about on the way? Of course, they were arguing about amongst themselves about which disciple was the greatest. Then in Mark 10:10, then he was in the house, and the disciples asked him again about this matter. There was a discussion about marriage and divorce that he just had with the Pharisees and the scribes, and they were still not sure about what he meant. I'm just establishing there's a house. He's made Capernaum his home, and he lives there, and people are saying, oh, he's at home, and going to him. And then when they leave teaching from the crowds, they go home. This is his home. He's going home, and they're asking him questions when they get home. This is something that people don't see usually, but it's right there in front of you once you see it. He's not homeless. He's living in Capernaum, and he has a place to stay. They refer to him, when they find out that he's home, they say, oh, he's home. He's in the house. Mm-hmm. All right, so here's another disciple, number 4. We know exactly where he's from, according to John 21:2, Nathanael, who may also be called Bartholomew, okay? Because we've got a Bartholomew in the text, and it's like we're supposed to have 12 disciples, but they're really more like 15, and we're trying to figure out who's who. Matthew, we know Matthew's Levi because it comes right out and says so, but sometimes, like in this case, it doesn't really make it clear that Nathanael and Bartholomew might be the same guy, but they could be. All right, Nathanael is the one who said, can anything good come from Nazareth, right? Perhaps this is Bartholomew, but he's from Cana of Galilee, and on the picture on the left, you can see Cana. It is on the top of a hill in Galilee, and in the background in the upper left, you can see, not the Sea of Galilee, it's too far away. Cana is pretty close to Nazareth. What you're looking at is the Beit Netofa Valley. These are just foothills in Upper Galilee, and you can see the remains of houses there And they've done a lot of excavations there from the University of Puget Sound. So we know where he's from. So we got Andrew and Peter and Philip are from Bethsaida. And number 4, Nathaniel's from Cana. Where did the wedding happen? So have you ever thought about, if he's from Cana, maybe that, I don't know, maybe he got married, or maybe somebody in his family got married, or maybe because Jesus is close to Nathaniel, you know, I mean, they ended up getting close to the family and they got invited. I mean, there's you know, it's probably not a coincidence that Nathaniel's from Cana and they went to a wedding at Cana. But you don't think about these things, you see. Well, what about Judas? Judas is a problem in more ways than one, obviously, right? So he may be from Cariot in the extreme southern deserts of Judea. It says it says in the scriptures that he is called Judas Iscariot in some places, and he's called Judas the son of Simon Iscariot in other places. So could he be from Cariot? The meaning Judas from Cariot. Now, this is a town. It's a real place in Judah. It's called Cariot or Carioth. It's today identified with the ruins of El Keretin, about 10 miles south of Hebron, about 4 miles north of Arad. But Judas Iscariot could also mean Judas the Sicarius, meaning Judas, a member of the brutal Sicari, daggermen, assassins considered to be more ruthless than the Zealots. You know, it was the Sicari who were holding out at Masada when the Romans came and took it in 70 AD. It wasn't Zealots. It was the Sicari, and they're worse than the Zealots. In fact, they raided En-Gedi and killed all the Hebrew women and men and children there and took all their stuff to hold out against the Romans. They were killing their own Hebrew brothers and sisters. These guys were brutal. So we don't really know. I lean toward him being from Cariot, but he also could have been associated with the assassins. It wasn't he who swung the blade, though, in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was Peter. I like to think that maybe Judas was better with a blade if he was a Sicari than Peter was, because Peter like sliced an ear.
Yeah.
I think he meant to do more than that. He just missed. So this village right here, you can see it's more deserty down there because it's in the hills right above the Negev. They don't get much rain there. That's about as green as you'll ever see it.
Bert, you think Judas, it says, but Judas Iscariot could also mean Judas the Sicarius. See,
Yeah.
see the similarity of
Exactly.
Iscariot with
It is very similar. So he could be Judas from Cariot, or he could be Judas the Sicarius. Both words are similar. We just don't know which it is. Most scholars lean toward Judas from Cariot, but there are other scholars, maybe a third of them, I'm just guessing, maybe a third of them think that he was from the Sicari, the dagger men, the assassins.
Okay.
And that's because of his behavior?
No, just because of his background. I don't think there's anything in his behavior that suggests he was an assassin. You know, he was more of a weasel. You know, he made deals, he took the money, he betrayed. He didn't kill anybody except himself.
That's what I meant by behavior, by the betrayal.
Well, that doesn't have anything to do with being an assassin. If he were an assassin, he'd just cut Jesus' throat. So I lean toward him being from Cariot, but I used to lean the other way. So who knows? This is Matthew, and we don't know where he's from. It doesn't say where he's originally from, but there is strong evidence that points to him living and working in Capernaum.
He looks so innocent, so young.
It's funny how they handle him on The Chosen. He's got some sort of autism or Asperger's, or he's got some sort of strange personality quirk. He's very good with numbers, but very bad with people.
Okay.
Yeah, awkward socially. At any rate, so he's called Matthew. He's also called Levi. All right, so it says in the scriptures that his tax booth is near Capernaum, right? And prior to Jesus's conversation with him at the booth, Jesus heals a paralytic man at home in Capernaum. So we know we're double in Capernaum. And then he has dinner in Matthew's house immediately. So we're still in Capernaum. And there's no other town mentioned in that chapter. So living and working in Capernaum doesn't prove that Matthew was born and raised there, but it's pretty clear that he lived there and worked there. So thus I have a picture of part of the excavation at Capernaum there to the left for our tax collector. Remember that he has a tax collector's booth on the highway. Now, what highway is that? It's one of the most important highways in Israel. It's the Via Maris. And we're very near a border. There's a border between Capernaum and Bethsaida, and you had to pay a border tax. He may have been the type border tax guy, or he could have been, the temple tax guy. He could have been, he could have taken taxes for a number of things. But he sat in a booth by the Via Maris and made people pay in order to pass. He's the toll booth guy. I hope he gives correct change. All right, now we get finally to two of the most important disciples, James, and they call him here Big James. In season 2, it's a different actor, I think. So that's why it says second season. I think Big James was someone else in the first season, but this is John on the left and Big James on the right. These are two brothers. They fished in the Sea of Galilee. They fished for a living, and that's usually a trade that's taught from childhood by their father, whose name was Zebedee. And Luke 15:10 claims that Zebedee, James, and John were fishing partners with Simon and Andrew. So while no specific town is confirmed as the hometown of Zebedee and his sons, their fishing partners are from Bethsaida, and their fishing partners have a house at Capernaum. So, and those aren't too far apart. On the left, you've got Capernaum. On the right, you've got Bethsaida. And you can't throw a rock from one to the other, but you can walk from one to the other in 30 minutes or less. It's close. It's one of the nice things about Bethsaida is nobody ever built a church there. Well, no modern churches to cover them up. That's what happens to most of them. They get covered up, a Byzantine church, then a Crusader church, and then modern churches, and they cover up the site so that you can't see the way the village was in the day. But at Bethsaida, if that's the right Bethsaida, you can see what it looks like. So here we have two guys, we don't know where they're from. So number 9 is Thomas. And he has a few lines in John's gospel, and thus he's somewhat less obscure than some of the following disciples that we're going to look at, the last 3. He's not referred to in scripture as Doubting Thomas, but he's famous all over the world for being Doubting Thomas. But his real nickname was the twin, Didymus. He was Thomas Didymus. Okay. And we presume he is from Galilee, as claimed in Acts 1:11, as we said at the beginning of this talk, but we don't know from where he came. We don't know what town. Could have been anywhere. Now we have Judas, son of James. And this is not to be confused with Judas Iscariot. There are 2 Judases, and Jesus has a brother named Judas. So there's several of them. But this one is called Judas, the son of James. And he fits among the obscure apostles, even though he has one line in scripture in John 14:22. Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, Lord, how is it that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world? We presume that this Judas is somewhere from in Galilee, as claimed in Acts 1:11, but we don't know anything else about it. He's only got that one line. And here are our last 2. We got another James, James the son of Alphaeus. This could also be Thaddeus. They seem to be interchangeable from gospel to gospel. So little James or James the son of Alphaeus or Thaddeus is perhaps the most obscure of Jesus's disciples. He has no lines. We're not even sure we got the right person. Other than assuming he's from Galilee, we can't presume anything else. Now, here's one we probably ought to take a look at, because everybody calls him Simon the Zealot and assumes that he was one of those zealots, one of those revolutionaries. Probably not. Let me tell you why. He's mentioned in Acts 1:13 and Luke 6:15 that he's probably been misidentified as a revolutionary, because they did have a sect called the Zealots, but he is called Zealotos, which means zealous. And this Simon, not to be confused with Simon Peter or Simon Jesus' brother, is also called the Canaaneos or the Cananites. And that's in Matthew 10:4 and Mark 3:18. But these designations are not likely geographical, like Canaanite or from Cana. It points to neither Canaan nor Cana. That's Zealotos in Greek, but in Hebrew, it's Canai. It means the same thing, zealous. So we're not talking about a zealot. We're talking about a person who's religiously zealous. To me, it's more logical to presume that like he and like all of the other referenced and others referenced was from Galilee, and that he was zealous for his faith. And this is a description of his character, not his job or his location. He is a devout person. And we have the apostle Simon Peter called the Rock. We have Simon, the brother of Jesus. This is the third Simon, and he's called the Zealous One. And is otherwise an obscure apostle, has no lines, and we presume he's from Galilee. That's it. So yeah, so next week, how many women traveled with Jesus? We know their names. Who were they? And what towns were they from? We'll look at that next week. So discussion about these disciples. What surprised you?
I'm wondering if when they chose these men to play this part, if they, I mean, what they based it on? If, you know, and it may not mean anything, and they may have just chosen 12 men. I don't know. I just wondered if there was something that when I noted Matthew being the younger looking.
Okay, so how did they select the actors? I think they just picked people who looked Middle Eastern. I think they were concerned that all the other Jesus movies tend to lean toward the Jesus and the apostles looking pretty Scandinavian or at least European. And so they made a point to try to pick people who looked Jewish, generally speaking, and who looked Middle Eastern.
For me, what was most important in your presentation that I really enjoyed was the fact of seeing the picture and location. See, I've never been overseas, but to see the places,
Yes.
that impressed me, to see the different locations in the cities and the live, you know, where they live. That I really enjoyed going through that and looking at that. I know you were talking about the disciples, but I enjoyed learning that.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
When Chosen first came out, of course, they've got a group, The Chosen. And me and another friend from upstate New York, they told us, because we talked to some of the cast, they told us that the director and the producer and other people had gone over there, and they have kind of looked at people, the skin color, the majority, the minority, whatever. And this is how they based their color and the hair to make the story look a little more real. They said it does not mean that it's fact, that this is what they all look like, but they were trying to get the skin tone, the speech, and all of that, like the Roman character with Matthew in that scene. He looked so Roman, but he wasn't Roman at all. But he was so close at looking like a Roman, they picked him.
What stood out to me was the characters, and I wondered if they were chosen based on what they read in the Bibles.
I'm not aware of their age. I'm not aware of the age of any of the disciples being mentioned. Jesus's age is pretty good, easy to estimate, but the disciples are impossible to estimate. And there's the only thing that we can do about their characters is you know, we're lucky with Peter because, you know, there's so much about Peter. Jesus talks to Peter a lot, so we can get a sense of Peter's characters, but the others are so briefly mentioned and do and say so little. It's difficult to draw conclusions on how what their personality was like, much less what they looked like. We don't have any idea what Peter looked like. We don't know if he was 27 or 47. We don't know if he was short or tall. We don't know if he was skinny or fat. We don't know anything about him. If I were making a movie, but though, I mean, I think I would do what they did, which is pick people who look like you would think that, like, look at the Jewish people who are there and have been there for centuries. You know, look at them. Look at the Palestinian people. You know, look at the local population. Middle Eastern and Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean people have a similar look.
I think they get Jesus pictures wrong most of the time. I mean,
Oh, yeah. Well, I have read the scriptures pretty closely, and I've seen no mention of their ages. But I will say this: the life expectancy for a man, according to Josephus, who was at the Israeli Antiquities Authorities, and his responsibility was dating bones of people who lived back then. He said, if you don't count Qumran, where they all died early, he said the average life expectancy was 45 for a man and about 30 for a woman. I wish we knew how old they were, but we don't.
Yeah.
I've got
And
a
it-
question here from Becky that I want to get to.
Okay, go ahead. It's
She says-
just nothing from now on.
She says, do you think that there were more than 12 people traveling, you know, as they could, that the disciples were a fluid group? And my answer to that question is yes, 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 yes. Okay, there were more than 12 men, and there were more than 5 women traveling with him. It's just we don't know their names. It clearly says in the scriptures that that there were these women doing this, plus many others. The 12 were traveling with him, and also the 70. There are more people. There are a lot of, and as you know, he goes along the road, people say, I'll follow you anywhere, call me. You know, so it's very fluid. And as they move along, there are more or less, there's more or less a bit of a parade or an entourage moving along with them. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Becky. I wasn't there, so I don't know, but I read what it says. And yeah, there were at least 12 guys, and there were at least 3 to 5 women at any time, plus many others. Yeah, it was more than just the 12 on the road. There were, yeah. So what else? I haven't heard from you, Mike. What's up? I was just asking what surprised people, what people were wondering about.
I don't know that I was surprised. There's a lot of things I don't know. So I was kind of like Gloria. I was taken by, you know, just looking at the pictures and seeing what it looks like.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been where Peter's house is, or the house of Jesus. You know, it's venerated. I know that, and you know, it's probably a first century house. You know, it's right beside the excavated town of Capernaum. You know, the white synagogue. I mean, I've seen all that, and the Roman road right beside it. But and we talk about the house of Jesus. You know, Jesus had a place, and I don't argue that. But one scripture says, Jesus says, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Foxes have dens, and you know, places, you know, where they have a place to go and live. But he says he said of himself, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And I'm trying to connect that with, well, if he has a house, then he has a place to lay his head.
But it might
yeah.
not be his home. So maybe that's what he's.
Okay, I won't argue that. I mean, I'm not trying to cause an argument.
Yeah, so no, I wouldn't go in that direction.
I wouldn't either.
He's speaking symbolically. This is a metaphorical statement. He's not talking about literally not having anywhere to sleep.
Yeah, he has told them, tell me if I'm wrong, Bert, that you know, he's there, he wants to make their burden lighter. And he can do that because of his perspective and how he sees things. He can help make your burden lighter as you talk to him, but there's no one that really can do that for him other than his heavenly Father. Is that
I think that sounds good, and I want to add one other thing. Also, the people who were coming to him and were saying, I want to follow you, he was concerned about their attachments to those things. And in one case, a young man came up and said, I'll follow you anywhere you go. And he said, birds of the air have nests and foxes have dens, Well, what's the symbol for Rome? An eagle. What's the nickname for Herod? The fox. He called him the fox at least twice. So he's saying, look, if you think we're going to Jerusalem to be important people, the birds of the air, they know how to yield power and build their areas way up into tops of trees and magnificent places to live. And foxes know how to, they know how to make their own dens, make themselves secure. They have a place to go that's secure, and that's all they care about. But dude, I'm on the road and I'm not going for power. I'm going to give my life. I'm not going to secure myself someplace like the foxes and the birds of the air do, like the Romans do, like Herod does. I'm not going to be king. Don't get, this is a corrective.
I don't disagree at all. I mean, I just wanted you to say that, to clarify that, because there'll be some people, I mean, I was playing the devil's advocate. There are some people who would say that text, take it literally, which refutes the idea that Jesus has a place called home, a house. And I wanted you to say just what you said. And I was really just presenting.
Thanks for throwing me thanks for lobbing me the softball across the middle of the plate. I do appreciate that.
Well, but there are people, especially where I have served as pastor, who would not say that's a metaphorical statement that he's making. They would say, this just proves that he's a poor vagabond traveling, preaching, and being.
Oh yeah, but why did he talk about foxes and birds? Was he meaning that they were foxes and birds? Who's the literal foxes and birds? I mean, if we're going to take foxes, if we're going to take, he has no place to lay his head, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head, literally. Well, then we've got to also literally take the foxes and the birds of the air, literally. So where are these foxes and these birds of the air? Where are they, and what do they have to do with anything?
Bert, you're providing me with the fire to share that good news, because I don't argue against what you're saying. I'm just saying there are people who would just pick apart just that conversation.
I know.
And
I'm letting you pretend to be one of those people right now, and I appreciate
I'm letting you pretend to be the philosopher who can straighten them out too.
Yeah, I am pretending.
Could he be saying too that these animals can all make a place to lay their head, as well as we can too? I mean, no matter where you are, you can make a home. I mean,
Well, Jesus did make a home.
that's
It
what
says
I'm
so in the
saying.
Bible.
So, right, everybody's got a place to lay their head.
So he's speaking metaphorically. He's saying, I'm not going to be working to secure myself.
Right.
I don't have political aspirations like Herod the fox. I
Right.
don't have an intent to run Rome out, those eagles. We're not going to be arming. I'm not going to be establishing myself on a throne. This is not about me securing my place.
But Dale, thank you for being the advocate.
Thank you, Dale. I thought this was much more fun tonight to look at the disciples. And we're going to look at the women next week. Who are some of the women? Do you know the names of any of the women who were on the road with Jesus every day?
Mary Magdalene
You got one.
Joanna.
is
You got two.
Martha,
Nope.
his mother Mary?
Nope. She didn't travel with him at all.
No.
Joanna was a good one. Dale, was that you?
Yes.
That's Chusa's wife. Chusa was one of Herod's employees. He was like a secretary or a treasurer or something, steward. And you know her name? I'm thinking of Susanna, and her name is only in the Bible once, and we don't know anything about her. But she was on the road all the time with Jesus. And then there were some other women's names who were mentioned who followed him all the way from Galilee to Jerusalem that last visit. And they didn't necessarily know it would be his last visit. So there were a lot of women. More women are named who were like at the cross, who came with him all the way from Galilee, names that we can add. Okay, and there are a couple of them named Mary. There's
Yeah,
one named
it's about-
Salome, one named
It's about
Salome.
3 Mary. Wasn't
Yeah.
it 3 Marys?
3 Marys and a Salome.
Yeah.
Solomon, yes.
About Susanna.
Suzanne is the one that was on the road with him, and she had deep pockets, and she was helping pay for their travels. That's all we know about her. So we're going to look at those women next week. I'm going to tell you everything that I can find out about them. If you want to read about it in the meantime, please do. And we'll see you on Sunday morning for those of you who can join us for worship. 10 o'clock Eastern, 9 Central. Gene services is 10 Central and 11 Eastern. Hey to Becky, and thanks for joining us. Y'all have a great evening.
Yeah.
God bless. Take care.
All right.
Y'all too. Bye-bye. Nice
Good
seeing
night,
you.
everybody.
Good
Good
Good to see
night.
you, Sheila.
Good night.